Hello, Year 11, and welcome to our third video here for our sixth topic. We are looking at bonuses, allowances, and annual leave loading in this exercise. Now, bonus, we're fairly familiar with that term in common usage, I suppose, and it's no different in finance, really, that a bonus is a one-off payment given for all sorts of reasons. It might be because you've met a particular target, or perhaps the company has met a particular target, made a certain amount of money, and it's decided, as a goodwill gesture, to give some of that money back to the employees, right? So it's just a one-off amount that's transferred there. There's not a lot of calculation to be involved. An allowance, on the other hand, an allowance is a more complicated measure. There are really two types of allowances. One is a reimbursement of expenses. So you might get a meal allowance or a travel allowance that is to compensate you for money that you've spent to perform your duties for work, right? Different to a tax deduction that we'll get to later, right? You might be paid a meal allowance or a uniform allowance, a laundry allowance, or something like this to make up for the fact that you're expected to pay to do something like wash your uniform so that you can perform your duties adequately, right? So you may be paid an allowance for that, and that's usually a fixed amount per week or fortnight or something like that. The other kind of allowance is to compensate you for doing something that's, well, perhaps a little harder or more unpleasant than your usual duties. So you might get paid something like a confined spaces allowance for working in a small stormwater drain underground, perhaps, or for working at height, or perhaps for handling unexploded explosive ordnance, who knows. Something that's perhaps a bit more dangerous or unpleasant, you might get an allowance for doing that as well, and that's probably paid per hour. Okay, so that's bonuses and that's allowance. Finally, annual leave loading. I'm led to understand by some accountant friends of mine that this is less and less common in the workplace, but it's something that I've always been familiar with most of my employment, and that is that when you take annual leave, which is typically 4 weeks a year working in Australia, you get 4 weeks a year when you can take annual leave, right? And you'll be paid during those holidays. You only get that when you're a full-time worker. You won't get that if you're casual. You'll get a portion of that if you're part-time. But in addition to being on leave, on holidays, you're also paid at a higher rate if you receive annual leave loading. Essentially, it's like a penalty rate of 17.5%. So instead of just getting your normal pay, you get an extra 17.5% on top of that, or your normal rate of pay is 1.175 times the normal rate. There we go. Annual leave loading. Let's jump into an example. I've got a construction worker here in an isolated area. We've got a weekly wage of this, plus a site allowance of 104.80. So that would be to make up for the fact that you're in an isolated area, right? The fact that you're a long way from home, whatever else, and there's not many facilities around, whatever. So we've got an allowance there. We've got a meal allowance of $16.20 per day, and a height allowance of $5.60 per hour. Right, so we've got 3 different types of allowances there. She works 9 hours a day for 5 days. Calculate the weekly pay. Well, of course, I have. My weekly pay is going to be the standard wage here of $12.80.25. Whoops. We've got that. From there, we add on a weekly 104.80. We also need to add on a meal allowance of $16.20 per day, and there's 5 days that she works, so we've got to do plus 5 times the $16.20, and this height allowance of $5.60 per hour. Now, I've got 9 hours times 5 days times $5.60. Right, that's what the weekly pay is going to be. It's a fairly long expression. Let's break it down one bit at a time. 1280.25. Right, that's the wage. And this is my side allowance, 104.80. Now let's calculate this. 5 times 16.20. What is that, $81? Better use the calculator. 5 times 16.20 equals $81. Right. And this one here, 9 times 5 times 560. 9 times 5 times 5.6 equals 252. Rightio. So the wage, side allowance, meal allowance, height allowance. Now I'll add all of those four things together. It's my 250. Drag this over here. Right. 1280.25 plus 104.80 plus 81 plus 252 equals 1,718.05. Did I copy that correctly? 1718.05. Excellent. Rightio. So we have calculated a variety of allowances there for that worker. Moving on to example 7 here. Hayden earns an annual salary of this much, and I want to know the holiday loading. Right, correct to the nearest cent. So it does say use 52.18 weeks in a year. I'm going to work out what we earn each week, what Hayden earns each week. I'm going to work out what he earns in 4 weeks, and then I'm going to find 17.5% of that. So Hayden's weekly pay is $46,598. Divided by 52.18, because that's been specified. Right. 46,598 divided by 52.18. Right, so Hayden earns $893.02 per week. $893.02. Now I want to work out what he earns for 4 weeks. 4 times that figure. Back here. Now it's best to leave it unrounded here, just so you don't multiply that rounding error. We get 3,572. Let's call it 10. 3,572.10. Right, so that's what Hayden is paid for 4 weeks. Now the loading is 17.5%. Whoops, why am I putting that decimal in there? That's a terrible mistake. 0.175, that's 17.5%, 17.5 divided by 100, multiplied by his pay for 4 weeks. To 10 equals, we've got this, multiply it by 0.175, and I get 625.12. Rightio, and that is Hayden's holiday loading for the year. Right, he gets an extra $625.12 over the course of a year while he's taking his annual leave. And you might be paid that, you know, because during holidays you'll want to do extra stuff, right? You want to go out a bit more, you might go away somewhere. That might not cover the whole cost, but, you know, makes life a little bit easier. Rightio, that is it for bonuses, allowances, and annual leave loading. Right, there's lots of bits to remember, but generally you'll find the calculations are pretty straightforward. Right, you can see we didn't look at an example with a bonus because there's really no calculation. You just get the money. Anyway, if you've got any questions, jot them down, shoot me a message, or ask me in class. Okay, thanks very much.